right, what's up, everybody? We are back at the verdigris table for another sesh of D20 questions. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Peter from Tales from Elsewhere. Peter's doing some awesome stuff on YouTube and awesome stuff in the works coming up, which I'm excited to talk about. Peter, tell the fine folks where they can find you and what you're doing there.
Sure. You can find me at talesfromelsewhere.com or just at Tales from Elsewhere Games on YouTube. And there I talk a lot about game design philosophy, about the structures that go into game design in a very detailed, almost educational way. So if that's something you're interested in, that's what you can find on my channel. I also talk about the dev progress of the first Tales from Elsewhere book called Clockworld, which is a post-apocalyptic Weird West action horror setting. And I couldn't be more excited about that. I love all of those genre terms. So if any of that interests you, you can find out more on YouTube or at the website.
Yeah, it's dope. I'm excited for the game, but I really like your approach to things because it is very educational is a good word for it. It's very measured. And you're like, here's what to consider. And you prioritize fun, right? There's a video where you're talking about balancing classes and having symmetry between classes and how those are two different things and how you can overcorrect and just homogenize, I think is the word you use actually, just like flatline the whole game. And it's like, okay, this is beautiful mathematically and no longer a game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a math and systems person. Like, I like intricate systems, but they all need to be serving the real goal of any tabletop game, and that's to have a good time with your friends, right? It's a lofty goal to have, but the way you get there is not easy, actually, right?
Mm.
There's so many approaches, and I think right now where the community is, the tabletop community, especially over the last several years, we're seeing so many experimental approaches, so many different things. The OGL controversy, for example, made people maybe shake up a little bit and think, what else could we do? Well, maybe there's other approaches apart from just a D20 rollover system. So I think there's just lots of cool approaches, and there's no right or wrong there, but there's a best approach to serve a goal. And so that's what I'm trying to help people figure out is like, what would be your goal and how can you get there? So it's tricky and interesting and nuanced.
And it's so refreshing because you embrace that nuance and delve deep into it. Whereas like so much is either analytical and it's like, this is why this is bad, or it's all vibes. And
Right.
and
Right.
you are taking the analytical to serve the vibes, and the whole time being like, this is the choice I am making here. Here is my reasoning. Here's why you might be perfectly validated in doing a different thing here. And
Yeah,
that's
there's
rare on
not.
the internet.
Thank you. I mean, I've started to find my niche. I've only been at the content creator stuff for about 4 months now. And I joke that the last time I was on social media, I had a MySpace. And so it's been a minute since I've been out in public, I guess you could say. But I think I've quickly realized what my contribution is to that community because there's so many great content creators out there covering all sorts of things from like designing your own adventures, how to draw maps, right? How to do session zeros. I don't really have anything new to say on a lot of that subject, but what I can talk about is, I don't know, the nitty-gritty of incentivization mechanics, like how you design a particular spell or ability will influence how the players will interact with it. Like nobody's really talking as much about that sort of thing. It's a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. And it is the line between game master and game designer developer is a lot more permeable, I think, than people realize. If you're running a
Yeah,
game, you're making judgment calls and having like that background of information to understand why you might choose to go zig or zag at a given moment is yeah,
absolutely.
super helpful to anyone,
And
even if
no
you're not
one,
making a game right now.
yeah, and no one's going to know what type of game or what type of experience will be best for your table than you, right? If you've been running a
Mm.
game of D&D with your friends for a decade, you know, you're going to know what's fun for them. And so some of my content is trying to help elucidate what sort of systems help achieve some of those goals, and you know why
Mhm.
they do it that way, so that you're not kind of fumbling around in the dark a bit for the nitty gritty stuff like the differences between like roll over, roll under, or number of successes versus ternary versus binary successes, all this kind of like really heady stuff. I'm hoping it unpacks it a little bit and is helpful for folks who want to dig a little deeper in that regard.
Yeah, and that shines through.
Yeah,
That shines through for sure.
thank
You're
you.
making it approachable and again relevant. It's like this is what it does to your game while you're playing, not just
Right.
this hypothetical analytical white room
Yeah. One
that
of
a
my
lot of people delve into.
in my other life, right? I have a day job. A lot of what I have to do is unpack sometimes very complex software related or database related concepts to non-technical people. And
Mhm.
so that's helped train me on how to unpack otherwise fairly complicated subjects and make them a little bit more parsable, easier to grok. Because, if you're explaining to somebody in marketing how this piece of software works, you can't start digging into the actual code language and any of the specifics. You've got to break that down into something more digestible. So it translated oddly enough.
Yeah, yeah, and that shines through. Soft skill set is valuable for
Yeah.
anyone on YouTube, but like also anyone running a game or building a game and trying to tell other people how it works.
Yeah. And I will say for any up and coming software developers out there, you want to stand out, learn some soft skills. They are not common in the software world. And if you carry yourself really well, it goes a long way in the highly competitive software world at the moment. So, pro tip for anybody out there.
Yeah, and I think that applies. I'm not going to touch how specifically that applies to software, but that applies to most anything that you're doing. Somewhere along the process, you're probably interacting with another human being.
Yeah, chances are you got to talk to somebody. Yep. The person
Yes.
who signs your paychecks are right. You want to be able to talk to them real nice.
Oh. Or at least make sure that they think you're being nice.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
also, I mean, those soft skills are crazy valuable in whatever TTRPGs you're playing, especially if you're running it with a table full of people. So let's
100%.
dive in. I'm going to ask you to roll a d20, please and
All
thank you.
right.
Let's get some questions.
And I only roll metal dice these days, so I'm going to get a nice good
Nice.
roll on. I got 15.
15. So I should say there's no good or bad. There is a tonal shift between the numbers.
I like bad results on any random table, so even if there were a bad one, totally on board.
Yeah,
I like bad
there's
tables.
no gotcha. I will say if you get doubles, we go into the lightning round.
Gotcha.
All right. Name a moment that would be on your TTRPG highlight reel.
Okay. One from a session that I've recently run, I ran some long form playtests of the game I'm working on, right? It's post-apocalyptic Weird West horror, all this stuff. And in the adventure, the players were tasked with helping a caravan travel out into the ruination over a long period of time. The whole campaign was one trip through an apocalyptic wasteland. And they had all these characters with them, these NPCs, they got to know them. And one of those NPCs was their guide along this journey, the person who had helped scout the location they were traveling to, a pre apocalypse ruin they were going to go try to rebuild. And so she had found it, come back, and led this caravan there. Well, in the second to the last session, or the very last session, they're in a evil dungeon full of monsters, let's just say. And they discover the corpse of that character who had
Ooh.
been there months and months ago, long time ago. And they had left her back in town kind of to watch over everybody while they went into this extremely deadly dungeon, for not to spoil if anybody, not to spoil it. And so it dawned on them in that moment that who have they been traveling with and why have they been brought here? Because all of these, over 50 civilians, right, NPCs have all been brought into this remote part of the apocalyptic wasteland, and why? And so that's like my peak kind of session right there. The dread that they saw, and they thought, okay, get the guns ready. Let's go back to town and confront her, right? And that moment of realization for them would be on my highlight reel.
You are speaking my language. I am beaming. That's the good stuff on the Dungeon Master side of things. I think a lot of people early in their career perhaps try to like rush something like that and do the old Scooby-Doo, the quest giver is the bad guy at the end, and you have like two
Right.
hours to reveal it, and it's all very like hackneyed. And then like there's a lot of general advice of like, oh, don't do that.
Right. And I had sprinkled little clues that something was off throughout the adventure, but they would be very hard to detect. Only in hindsight would they make sense. Like, no monsters ever attack this character out
Mm.
in, all the NPCs are getting threatened, but only if they were really paying attention when they realize she's never targeted by any of these horrors out there. She's one of them. And so little things like that popped up, inconsistencies with a story, but only the most diligent of note taker would have realized that, because this character, this well, I'll just say it was like a shape like a doppelganger, basically,
Mhm.
a skinwalker had killed this character a long time ago and only had her knowledge up to that point. And so there was all these kind of these gaps there. So it didn't blindside them too badly, but it was a good enough horror movie twist to kind of end the campaign on the short campaign. But what I like about, as I age and as I've been in doing tabletop role playing games for so long, I'm becoming really fond of a campaign or a main arc that lasts no more than like 6 months,
Mm.
maybe twice a month gaming, where I can tell a complete story with fewer sessions and not worry about building a grand narrative, but something a little bit more intimate. It's easier to come into and out of, right? And I think that time pressure makes me more focused as an adventure writer. I can't just waste whole sessions like, all right, you're just going to go clear out some zombies this session, right? There needs to be like purpose behind each encounter. So, yeah, that's where I've been drifting as I age.
I I love that because yeah, early on, especially if you're coming through like whatever talking heads on YouTube, there is this kind of put on a pedestal effect of like the 30-year campaign and like years and years and like you want to play D&D? Here's a 300-page book. Whereas, ooh, even if you're gonna do that, like break it up into seasons, make it chunks, make it
Absolutely.
land. Because
Yeah.
like
Well, and
in my experience, real world stops you from playing with the same people for years if you're
yeah, well,
adults.
and I mean, by the time this video is out, this will be a little old, but the Elder Goblin, Jordan the Elder Goblin, just released a video this morning talking about this, about how if you do chapters like chunks, it's easier for when players have a kid or they get married. Like they made it for this chapter, but the next chapter they maybe won't be able to play, and so nobody has as much anxiety about
Mm.
signing up to play in your decade-long, you know, epic campaign where you've written, 1,000 pages of lore, right? They can hop in, enjoy a complete story, and then hop out if they need to. And that was really good for play testing as well.
Mm.
I don't want to have these these poor schmucks play testing the early version of my game, signing up for a 2 year stint. That's, no. If you can play, every other Friday for a couple months, we'll play one full story, right?
Love it. Yeah, a lot to unpack there because there is this, even if you are going to be there for the long haul, right? Like somehow you find the secret formula and there's 5 people who are going to be at this table for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
Even so, breaking up those 2 to 3 years into distinct chunks of story arc content is going to create a much more fulfilling experience. And
absolutely.
as you very insightfully say, probably is going to stop you from the filler episodes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that a lot of adventures have fights that are just sort of there to show off that you can fight. I guess you
Mm,
could say it's like this room has skeletons in it that you just need to clear out. I've just lost those don't like get me going as a DM or a player anymore. And I play a pretty wide variety of, I used to say D&D experiences. So I'm one of the blessed few that have a regular D&D group for the last 15 years,
mm,
every other Friday, like clockwork. And we rotate DMs every about 8 months. Somebody else comes up with a new campaign, and it's usually been D&D. We started with fourth edition D&D, this group of all things, and we'll cycle in Cypher System, or I'm trying to convince them to let me run a Blades in the Dark. They haven't really jumped on it yet, a Blades in the Dark campaign. I've run some of my game with them. We've done Octoon Cthulhu and Modifius 2D20, but it's mostly a D&D group. And if a DM knows I'm just signing up to run games only for 6 to 8 months, it also
Mm.
it's much less pressure because all of us are adults with careers and families and right, we've got all sorts of stuff. And I know that I don't have it in me to sign up to be a 3-year DM for a campaign or something. No, there's just no way.
Yeah, if you're trying to appeal to a new player or a new DM, that like short-term contract commitment is much more
Right.
appealing.
It's a good way to put it. And like I said, with the encounter design, one of the DMs in this rotation that I'm in, he loves an old school approach. And really, I need to get him a copy of Shadow Dark. I think he'd love it. He's always
Mm.
just played D&D in every edition, but he likes to pull AD&D adventures and convert them himself into 5.5 or D&D 2024. But so many of those adventures do have rooms that are just here's another room full of dwarf zombies. And after the third one of those, I'm like, I know this is meant. It's about the dungeon's attrition of your resources. It's the
Mm.
meta attrition of how deep can you go in the dungeon until you have to pull back. Like I get it. Doesn't mean I like it, but the third zombie fight, I'm like, all right, it's the zombie dwarf zombie and a one dwarf zombie cleric again. you know, we've solved this problem before, and without any conflicting motivations or goals in this scene, we just line up the minis. As cool as all the hand painted minis are that the DM has for this, roll initiative and kill them, and then loot the corpses and keep going. Not the most evocative scene.
Oh, preaching to the choir. You do a video about how that I think the title is like ditch hit points or something like that, but how like
Yeah, I have some
attrition
clickbaity.
is attrition is built into the core of most every
Yeah,
edition of D&D. And you got
and
100
that's
hit
what hit
points, you got
points.
one hit point. It's the same. It's the
Yeah.
same operation.
Well, and in OSR style games, in the old school type of D&D, hit points or gear or these resources you have are meant to be your long-term attrition for the dungeon itself rather than a fight by fight resource.
Mm.
And once you hit like fourth edition, maybe by the end of 3.5, fourth edition D&D, you start seeing hit points as a per encounter resource more so. In 5e, you refill a lot of hit points with a short rest. If you've got some hit die and a bard and maybe some potions, you're kind of assumed to top off a lot more frequently rather than having to wait to get back to town to fully heal up, right? There's a different approach. So hit points work a little better when they are represented as a slowly depleting meter that prevents you from going deeper rather than a video game like spiky thing that you're meant to reheal frequently. So I don't hate hit points. They have a purpose. I just don't think they're the whole idea. It's like the hammer that is used in a lot of systems without knowing what purpose the hammer is for, is maybe how I would describe it. But yeah, that video is like attrition-based combat bores me, ditch hit points, the usual
And
YouTube
it's
stuff.
yeah, cool, but it's not the usual YouTube stuff. Like it could,
Yeah,
like I don't know, it could. There's
yeah,
like a much spicier version of that I'm sure the listener's imagining right now, and like
yeah,
you really break it down, and it is insightful. Like okay, it's just kind of assumed that we need this health bar, and
right.
let's examine that assumption and go from there. And yeah, I
Yeah,
find I like old school and like low level 5e feels old school to me when like you have
yeah.
9 hit points. It feels a lot different than 99 hit points.
Absolutely. I really enjoy levels 1 through 5, actually. I know level 1 and 2 are pretty unpopular, is maybe how I would say. Like 3 to 5, level 3, you get your subclass and all that in D&D. I don't necessarily disagree there. I just like it when both outgoing and incoming, the actions of the enemies and the players result in a change in the fight in some
Mm,
substantive way. And like you're saying, if you have 99 hit points, each round from a simple hit point attrition standpoint isn't going to move the needle in one direction or the other. While at low levels, it tends to be more dramatic each thing you do. A single critical hit at level 2, incoming or outgoing, changes the fight. And that's cool. You can actually see evidence of whoever is in charge of the new zombie for the new D&D 2024, I think understood this. There's some math here. I won't dig into it too much. Old D&D 5e zombie has it's either 21 or 22 hit points. I've got my books here. I'm not gonna flip through it. 22 or 21 hit points. And that means that almost no level one characters can kill that in one hit with a
Hmm.
crit. They just don't deal enough damage at level one. You don't have enough features. They dropped it to, I think, 14 in
Hmm.
D&D 2024. Now, more characters can actually kill a zombie in one hit with a critical hit because the crit avoids their undead fortitude. So now it's more of the fiction of the ranger got a crit with the bow on the zombie in the head and kills it in one hit. That happens more frequently. And that's cool. Like, I like that kind of gameplay. So, whoever did, whichever one of you at Wizards of the Coast did that change on the zombie, that's good stuff.
They're definitely watching.
Yeah, but they still have zombies doing slams, and it still drives me nuts. I did a video rant on that too. It's just
You
zombies should
did.
fight.
Zombies are like deeply I don't run zombies straight. And like the fifth edition zombie is like unfulfilling for like in-game reasons and narrative reasons. It doesn't check either box.
Yeah, it's
I
not
ran
fun
them
to
last night
kill,
actually.
not fun to run. It just doesn't do anything. It walks up to things and punches them. I just find it so odd that that is the zombie that they've had since. Oh, I started playing at third edition in around the year 2000, and that's what the zombie's been the whole time I've played. Fourth edition shook up some stuff with its had more varieties of zombie types, if I remember correctly, but it's also been a while since I've looked at that. But yeah, the zombie should bite things. Zombie should be scary. Yeah.
Zombies should be contagious. That's my
Yeah,
fix.
yeah. How does a zombie plague spread? It's got to be narrative spread, is how it works, right? It's a manufactured plague, but the zombie itself is not the carrier of that rules is written and missed opportunity.
Makes it a lot less scary.
It's not as scary, but I mean, I like games. I like to have an element of horror in all the D&D games I run, or in most games I run, even if they're not a D&D game, like a superhero game. I like to include elements of horror. It's just my taste. So,
Even outside of that, it's like what you were saying about it being a meaningful interaction,
right.
a round of combat moving the needle. Like so often, and it's not just I feel like we're picking on 5e a little bit, but like it's in a lot of
Yeah.
like heroic fantasy games, like it's not even round to round. There's whole fights that are
Right.
meaningless. We haven't rolled initiative yet, and I know who's gonna win, and I know
Right.
there's no consequence to this, and
Yeah.
that you're gonna take a long rest afterwards, and there's gonna be no long-term impact, and we can just save ourselves an hour and a half.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
fast forward.
Obviously for clarity for those watching, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for 25 years. I have a session, well, at the time of recording, I have a session this Friday, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to have a ton of
Hmm.
fun. I still thoroughly enjoy playing D&D. I do get less satisfaction running it these days because of the reasons we're talking about. Those problems are more exposed when you have to construct the fights yourself. That's why I don't run zombies as they're written in the monster manual, right? I always tweak them or I add a lot of extra elements. I do just tons of homebrew when I do infrequently run Dungeons and Dragons, such as our right? As the DM, you
Hmm.
can, yeah. So yeah, not trying to dunk on D&D or anything like that. I play it. I love it still. Just critical of some design elements under the hood, maybe is how I describe it.
And that again, it's that like measured, analytical, with heart vibes that I keep
Yeah,
coming back to.
analytics with heart. Well,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
other video I did just not that long ago about culture of play versus rules as written. I was trying to
Mm.
communicate that idea too. It's like the fun you have at your table is legit, no matter how you do it. We're not here to talk about that, like on my channel. I'm not here to tell you about how to, like, that you're wrong for, I don't know, using D&D to run an investigative noir game. I don't care about that. But what we can talk about is what rules systems in D&D maybe serve or work against attempting to construct such a game, right? That's reasonable then, right? That's reasonable. At least I hope
Yeah.
it
And
comes off as reasonable.
it does. It comes off
Yeah,
as
okay.
you come off as eminently reasonable,
Good, good.
which again is I kind of stuck on that fact because that is perhaps lacking in some other places.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be bombastic. I know there's a lot of, maybe it's just because, like I said, I haven't really been on social media for so long. I kind of missed that bus. And so coming into it now, I'm just not interested in participating in that sort of conversation. It's fine if people want to debate about the business practices of Wizards of the Coast, right? Or Hasbro and engage in that. Or when somebody in the news talks about D&D and that's noteworthy, there are people covering this information. I'm just not really interested in talking about that, at least on the platform. And to be honest, what could I say that isn't already being covered, right? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have really anything to mention about that. It's pretty
Love it.
well covered, a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
That's an understatement. Roll another d20.
All right. Yeah.
That was a solid 15. What else we got?
16. We're just going to walk it up here one by one, I suppose.
Nice and easy. Nice and easy. What common advice out there on the internet or whatever form really only applies to more advanced game masters?
Ooh, that's a
So someone that's
really
out there
good
that's
question.
maybe lacking some sort of caveats that's like taken as a rule, but like is maybe not as
Yeah.
beginner friendly as it's
Did
presented.
you write every one of these questions?
I did. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's a really good question. But I just want to like point out that's a really good question. I
Thank
like
you.
the last one too, but this one, that's excellent. Here's my answer to that. Rules light games are often presented to the public as a great way to introduce tabletop role-playing games to players. You see where I'm going with this. Um,
Hmm.
However, I think those games are challenging to run for an inexperienced game master. Because of the lack of structure, they're expected to be everything. They're in a more rules light game, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but a rules light game has placed the burden of game design on the burden and privilege of game design on the game master. That's the freedom that it gives. You are able to manipulate it really fluidly because so much of the game is left undefined. That is a feature, not a bug, right?
Mm.
However, when I was 14 years old and picked up my first tabletop role playing game many years ago, I needed some structure because I had no exposure to what tabletop role playing games even were. Because I'm coming out of only the end of the Satanic Panic, right? It had concluded by the time I came into it. But I mean, one of my dear friends still couldn't have magic cards at home. Like his parents didn't want him to have that kind of stuff. So I needed to be shown by somebody else or have the book guide me as to what this would be, simply because I was unfamiliar with that type of play. And the third edition D&D books were very detailed and gave me a lot of structure, right? I can use the encounter builder information to pick out some goblins and skeletons or something, and I can make a fight with that. And the rules tell me mostly how to adjudicate what I needed. And then over time, I was able to turn it almost into a rules light play experience, right? As you grow more comfortable, you're able to homebrew and adjudicate more freely. But if I were to be handed, if 14-year-old me was given, it's a good example, something like Morkborg, which is extremely evocative and interesting and actually kind of hard to parse and understand what you should do with it unless you know how to approach running a game like that. So that's what I'm going to pick is if when you first sit down to teach people a tabletop role playing game, yeah, letting them just do whatever they want works for some people, but some players need structure. You hand them a character sheet that only has three stats, like I don't know, heart, strength, and mind, and you say go for it. Um, it can be really tough. Or something abstract like a powered by the apocalypse move might be challenging for them to wrap their head around. When if you just tell them roll the d20 and that tells me if you hit the goblin, right? Sometimes the structure is helpful for new players.
Absolutely. And new game masters is kind of where you started
Yes,
with that
yeah, new
too.
game
Like
masters. Yeah,
there's a sweet spot. I think new players, there's actually you have a whole video about I think it's just about the math side of things, but there is like
yeah,
a cognitive, I forget your terminology, but there's like a cognitive
yeah,
weight behind every
yeah.
choice and
Yeah, there's
equation.
arithmetic burden, but there's also
Mm,
cognitive burden, and these are
mm.
I could like do a whole video just separating those out maybe. But yeah, cognitive burden, uh, which is different again from decision paralysis. These are all different. The cognitive burden of a game can overwhelm players. So too many rules, like Pathfinder Second Edition, is very structured and balanced. comparatively. Balance is a I always regret saying the word a game is balanced. But anyway, um,
It means four things, and you mean two of them.
yeah,
So
yeah. And anyway, but you hand that to a group of new players and dungeon masters, and they may be overwhelmed by the cognitive burden, which is also an arithmetic burden. There's all these different burdens there, decision paralysis. So yeah, it's tough. You got to find the game that's right for the group when you introduce it to them. And that middle, well, as so many things in life, it's the middle way that ends up being the best, right? A balance of the two. It is often the best approach. Like my game
Abs-
isn't actually good for brand new game masters. Like I fully admit that because it's so deadly. It's meant for somebody to really have to think about it. And you can't just use an encounter builder to construct what will be, again, I'm putting quotes all over this, balanced, because the game is meant to be horror and the players are meant to be thrown through the grinder along the way. And that takes some skill to construct appropriately. So that's okay, right? That's a design goal of the game.
so many games try to be all things for all people. And I think that's the success and the source of a lot of the criticism of fifth edition,
Yeah.
right? They've done a remarkably good job doing that to a degree. And then once you get deep enough into it, you're like, oh, it's bad at this. Like if I want to take this in a particular direction,
Yeah,
there's a lot of weight behind it that I'm dragging with me.
absolutely. And I like to
Um,
heap praise on fourth edition D&D, which I feel like in the years since, people have come to appreciate some of what fourth edition did really well. And something that fourth edition has done that none of these other editions, I think before or since, have really done is stay on track for a specific design and type of gameplay they're going for. 4E knew exactly what it wanted to be. Now, what that was not something that the general D&D community wanted, but it knew exactly what it wanted to be, and it was willing to kill some sacred cows to do that, right? It fully fulfilled that design goal, even if it was a what is it, a like a financial failure for Hasbro, right? It just didn't sell like they wanted to, and a lot of people disliked that new direction. But it was also, I think, the most top to bottom cohesive of the D&D editions. And then fifth edition, like you said, aptly was trying to, it was beholden to many masters, maybe is a way to put it, right? It's attempting
mhm.
to satisfy those who were drawn away to like Paizo's products once fourth edition was released to Pathfinder, trying to pull some of them back maybe, but also trying to satisfy some of the OSR crowd, although that term wasn't as ubiquitous over a decade ago. But it's trying to fulfill a lot of that. And because of that, it's not committed to any one of those design goals. And so it doesn't really flourish in any one of those mechanically, doesn't flourish in any one of those approaches. You know, it's evidenced by fourth edition D&D had really robust social encounter resolution systems actually, because the skill challenge structure lets you run a social fight, kind of a series of skill checks and so forth. Um, and this is before even like clocks were around in from Blades in the Dark. This predates Blades in the Dark. So their skill challenges I think were excellent, and you could use them for exploration, for social situations, right? All of that kind of stuff. You can even add them to a fight to add an element of exploration or social to a fight. And they abandoned those for fifth edition, though, in favor of the more, I'm going to put big quotes here, traditional lack of structure around socialization, because they wanted to appease is maybe too negative sounding a word, but they wanted to appease the group that doesn't like too much constraint around how they resolve a role play heavy social situation, right? So, but again, then they lost something. I thought something of value was lost there.
And it's interesting by again, it's all about balance. But it's by setting that fulcrum point there,
Mhm.
right? You still have the skill set. So it
Yeah,
looks on the surface, especially to a newer game master, it looks that there is like a robust mechanical rule set here to adjudicate social situations. And
yeah,
then in practice, I mean, it
yeah,
depends on who's running the game and who's playing the game, but it does feel like, oh, I'm missing something, or I wish I didn't have these skills. That like I don't want the dice to decide this. I don't need a skill here. I
right.
don't need rules for this. And I think maybe that's just a more experienced game master determining their own personal preferences.
Yeah, well, player or game masters that have been running games, regardless of what system, for many years, you could flip through a book and you could run a session. You don't even need to prep, right? Experienced dungeon masters, game masters, if the players decide to try to talk their way through something you had planned as a fight, you can roll with it. You don't need the rule book at that point to work with the players on a resolution. You're able to be a mini game designer in the moment, and that's totally okay. It's that's fine. I actually just use skill challenges in D&D 5e. They're extremely easy to port over, to be honest. It's really just a number of successes before failures, and I like that kind of structure. I mean, you could just use progression clocks from Blades in the Dark in D&D because it's really easily portable to other things. I just think those structures are useful for giving social scenes or exploration scenes a little bit more weight. I'm going to say something controversial
Ooh, it's
on
about
this
time.
subject. What a game system mechanicizes is what that game is about.
Hmm.
So this is it's a bit of a hot take, and just to unpack that slightly,
I think
a
that's, I mean, that feels very valid to me. Yeah.
yeah, I don't believe that a game not mechanicizing something is an aspect of the game telling you that this is an important part of the gameplay. Saying just adjudicate it is not an aspect of game design. I mean, it's a decision you make as a designer, and that's okay to just adjudicate it. But we have to identify that if most of the content in, I've got my stack of 3 point or third edition through 5.5 PHBs right next to me. If I were to total all the pages of my 25 years of D&D, players handbooks, how many options, rules, and features among all the classes, subclasses, prestige classes were about violent resolution in one way or another? It would be the vast majority.
Hmm.
There are things that cover nonviolent resolution in these systems, but they're certainly not as mechanicized or emphasized throughout those rules. So we can say that these rule books are mostly concerned with mechanicizing violent resolution. That's okay, because again, you don't need the rules to know how to do this if you're experienced, but I like to cite Blades in the Dark, where every type of resolution has the same level of mechanical complexity. Doesn't matter if you're talking your way through something, fighting, sneaking, going shopping, all of these things can be
Downtime, like
right,
blowing
every
off
yeah,
steam. Yeah.
exactly. Going into what is it? Like indulging in your vices,
Hmm.
carousing, all this, all of these things have the same level of mechanical weight because each of these aspects of gameplay, Two Blades in the Dark, is just as important to the gameplay experience. So again, it's controversial, but I I know a lot of people like to say you can run anything in D&D, and you can, but I think it's inaccurate maybe to suggest that D&D gives you a tool set to run all types of gameplay at the same level of nuance and complexity, right? Like what is it? Half the Rangers features in fifth edition were just to basically negate the challenge of exploration. It turns it into a non-game. You can't get lost is like literally one of the features. Okay, I guess we just skip exploration phase in part, right? Like, oh, okay. That's disabling more interaction rather than increasing the interaction in it. Okay, I'll leave that subject. I could rant for too long about that.
No, well, I mean, we could talk about the Ranger for 2 hours, but the
Yeah,
the the idea on the box is that fifth edition is broken into thirds. And then if you
right.
quantify the rules in the book and the abilities in the book and the class features in the book and the feats and just like page count, ink spent on
Right.
combat is got to be 80 to 90+ % of what's there.
Yeah. And that's
And yeah,
okay,
and that's
right?
not
And
bad. That's not bad. But pretending
yeah,
this isn't a game about fighting monsters primarily, I think
yeah,
is disappointing to some people. And then they're like, man, it's like this is too much combat here. And like, where's the other
right.
support? Not in the
Yeah,
book.
and there's so many wonderful indie games out there, right, that do emphasize that. Like
Mm.
there's so many options out there that you could even if you're not going to play them, you could learn from them and port that into your D&D game if you really wanted to, right? Um, and when I talk to other indie designers, right, because I like to talk shop and commiserate, I'll kind of remind them that it's okay if your game doesn't have robust social skills because your game is, I don't know, maybe it's about cowboys fighting zombies like my game. Like, it's about rootin' tootin', riding on a train and you're shooting bandits and then the train derails and now there's zombies or something. Like, I don't want there to be a long zoomed in, like the game zooms in when they need to talk to somebody.
Mm.
It's fine for that to be expedient and simple, and you talk with the GM a bit, you roll some dice, you move on because it's not the focus of the game. And I'm not going to advertise the game as a being effective at social simulation, right? Because it's not. And it's okay though, right? There was a game, I'm going to blank on the name. I saw it was on Kickstarter a while ago. It was a game about crafting. Like it's the whole gameplay is about downtime crafting things and going on exploration adventures to find resources and bring them back. It wasn't about violent resolution. Or another one that was about like mapping. You're about exploring and mapping things, and there's literally no combat rules.
Mm.
It's okay.
Mm.
It's all right. Just means you wouldn't want to run that for I don't know, a dungeon crawler. It's okay though.
Knowing what you're playing.
Yeah,
And it's very particularly knowing what game you're building if you're if you're building a game, but
yeah,
just making sure everyone at the table is on the same page about what the game that you're looking to play is as well
yeah.
is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so many wonderful ones out there to pick from, right? So many cool ones. Deserving
Uh,
of like, your budget for tabletop books, right? That's how I'd maybe put it. Yeah.
and the secret is as you play through these games, you're collecting all of these skills and tools. And like, I mean, clocks from Blades in the Dark is a prime example of like I mean, I have a countdown dice half the time, just like in the player's face. Like,
Yep, exactly.
here is a very useful tool that can do a couple things, build dramatic tension, whatever, keep track of things behind the screen. That's in my pack now. I don't care what game we're playing.
Yeah.
Clocks are in my brain. Can't take them from me. I don't care if it's not in the game. I'm bringing it with me.
Right. Yeah. You can't prevent me from doing this. And they look like little
Mhm.
pizza pies, and I'm always eating pizza when I'm playing D&D, so it just works.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, give me another D20.
All right. 3.
A three. What is your? We got a little bit of this actually. What is your TTRPG origin story?
Ah, I like that. This will be slightly redundant with a video I did a little while ago, but I like to tell it. So I'm a big nerd in all things nerddom, always have been, but I had never touched tabletop role playing games. I played like Magic cards, video games. I was into all that kind of stuff. And then like just before high school, I think it was, I go and visit some family in Wisconsin. We go to the North Woods, near the lake, and no video games, no TV, nothing. And my cousin, he pulls out his third edition player's handbook. Got it. Got third edition player's handbook. He pulls it out and shows us how to play. And I make a sorcerer. I just thought it was, and I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever played. He got my sister, my other cousins, right? We sat at the dining table. We had one set of dice that he brought, and he introduced it to us. And I just thought it was the most fun I'd ever had. So I got home, buy all the books, and inartfully start running games for my friends, mostly based on, I don't know, like an anime I watched or a movie, right? As you do when you're a teenager and you first pick up D&D. And it was super fun. I did a bunch of rules wrong. I ended up figuring out like a year or so later, just tiny things because, it's a lot. Third edition is fairly crunchy and there's a lot of rules interactions. And then I was just super hooked since then. I had a pretty big library of third edition and 3.5 edition books. I bought all the splat books and it was just great. Played it all the way through. I've just basically been nonstop playing it since the year 2000. So in all the editions, around when fourth edition came out, I found this new group that I've been playing with. Because a lot of the people I had played D&D with as a teenager, they don't necessarily stick around in the same hometown you're in, right? You don't necessarily have the chance. And back then, there was no robust way to play D&D online that wasn't a pain. And so yeah, I went to the old Dungeons and Dragons forums that used to be on the Wizards of the Coast site.
Ooh.
They eventually shut down.
Hmm.
Those are Those were cool. I was on there all the time, found a local group advertising, and that has been where I've been playing most of my tabletop games since. Just this one group every other Friday, like clockwork. Everybody prioritizes it. It's good stuff. So that's me as a player, like me being in the hobby. That's my story.
Love it. Follow-up question. What is the origin story of Tales from Elsewhere and the leap from running
Ah,
games to
to
building
designing.
a game? Yeah.
Well, like everybody, it's pretty hybridic, but you read a rule book and you think, I can do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to fumble around with making a lot of D&D homebrew back in third and 3.5 edition, making my own classes, making prestige classes, like a lot of people do. You like to fiddle with things. I'd watch a cool movie. I'm 17 years old. I see a cool movie and I'm like, I can make a class that does this in D&D, which is a lot of fun. Then eventually, fast forward, I'm an adult, have a job and all that. And I started fiddling with the idea of my own setting and my own rules that would support it. Because I like Weird West and horror, there aren't, at the time, the only option was Deadlands, which is, I'm a big Deadlands fan. But I actually have never been that much of a fan of Deadlands as a rule system, the systems that they've used. Like, as an example, using having to play a hand of poker to cast a spell as a huckster is one of the most evocative and coolest mechanics like in any role-playing game. But it isn't exactly the most expedient resolution system.
Mm-hmm.
The game kind of stops and everybody waits for that to proceed. Things like that. So I actually liked the way Cyberpunk 2020 handled certain things. And if anybody has read that book, you might be thinking, what does it handle well? Like, what do you think it didn't handle well? I don't know. I just thought it had like targeting systems, right? And more robust cover systems. I thought it had interesting things for a Western game, right? Where you could make the gunplay a little bit more of the emphasis. And that was a long time. It was almost 10 years ago or something like that, that I started thinking about the setting. And I'd fiddle with it for a little while and then set it down for like 2 or 3 years at a time. And then when the pandemic rolled around, one of my buddies said, hey Peter, you should finish that Western game you're working on. And I said, all right. And so I just decided to buckle down. It was a good time to pick up a project to really like dig into something. So I just started going all in on it and learned a lot, did all this research, watched all these other videos, and hacked the game over and over and over again, you know, many versions of it until I'm here right now with a fairly refined version of that game that is cut down from the absurdity that it originally was based on Cyberpunk 2020. The edition that came out like the late 90s is an interesting read from a design standpoint. Um, it's almost inscrutable and impossible to play. um, yeah, so that's kind of how I did it. I just read a lot of rule books and applied some of my own practice in language analysis. My degree's in philosophy. And so digging into the way to construct rules and the way to construct systems is something that I basically studied how to do. And that translated over. Also, I'm a software developer. And so these two skills, it works well for game design. And yeah, I've just been going hard on that ever since.
Love it. Tales from Elsewhere. Tell folks where and so it's not quite out yet. You are currently playtesting it.
Correct.
I will put links down below, but tell the folks where to watch for Clock World is going to be the
Yes.
first
So my YouTube
iteration.
channel definitely has updates that get posted there. If you are really interested in seeing what's new on the game, there is a link to the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server, which is on the YouTube page. Because people in the Discord server, they get to participate in all sorts of internal playtests. Like I run games a couple times a month for just people in the Discord. We run little one shots, only about 2 hours, where I'll send them through some new fresh hell I've concocted to test out a new monster and get their feedback. And there's just a lot of community engagement there. The way I would describe the game as in beta, so alpha was completed to use some software terms, and it is a fully playable system from a playtest standpoint. Like you can download the character creation rules. There's the quick start guide that has one short adventure. Like you can play that, that all functions. So the step of development now is re-aggregating a new full manuscript from the playtest ones back again to another manuscript, as there was a alpha manuscript, time for beta manuscript, and then just a couple balancing tweaks here and there. But it's as a system, it has already been refined through several years of internal playtesting, running multiple long form campaigns. So it's pretty stable. Like I'm not going to ditch my injury system or something at this point. It's all pretty tested, but tweaking the
I
balance of certain features here and there, tweaking the monsters, that's really all I'm at this point.
Yeah, I should hope not, because there is um the most eye-catching, like intriguing things to me as the injury system, which kind of is part and parcel to like the called shots. It's a very interesting approach to rule sets. And I do enjoy watching you, and the philosophy background makes sense to me actually now. Like the explaining yourself in a balanced and rigorous way is always interesting too. Like this is how I got here. But man, it just sounds cool. I have not experienced gameplay yet, but the idea of, again, somebody shot you and it means something. It
Yeah.
changes how your
Shockingly,
character
that hurts. You're
acts in
right.
the world. Yeah.
It's not good to be shot. Yeah. Well, and it kind of tying back to the zombies, that was one of the first monsters I really thought about with an injury system is I want zombies to be scary. And so, a zombie in my game, if it bites your leg, the leg is disabled temporarily. Like you have a wound, you can't walk on that leg, and the wound won't stop bleeding because the zombie bite is like very infected. And now that one die resolution, that one violent exchange just changed the story. One of the party members now can't outrun the zombies. How do you fix that? How do you tackle that as a group? Because it uses side-based initiative, right? One side goes, then the other side goes. So every new threat turn presents new challenges for the players to coordinate on to solve. And one zombie bite, because it's an injury system, it's actually kind of scary to have that one thing occur. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
meaning
injury system's so much fun. I love it.
yeah, just like meaningful exchanges. And it cuts both ways. Like it's not just like I'm sure dungeon masters are salivating, but
Yeah, yeah,
so I bring in a lot of new people and like 50-50 chance if I'm sitting around a table with new players, someone's going to be like, I'm going to try to hit him in the eyes and blind him, or like
right.
whatever, call their shot. It's like, well, if you roll a 20, I'll give it to you, but
Yeah,
talk to me
or
at
like
6 levels when you cast blindness, and maybe we could get there. There's no good way to do that.
yeah, it's not built into the system. And I've definitely seen folks who've tried to kind of hack that into D&D. It's often with something like random tables, or you take a penalty to the attack. You can do it,
Hmm.
but it's not the game system isn't built from the ground up to accommodate it, right? It's not part of the DNA. Yeah, it's nice when the players think like, well, he's holding a gun. What if I stabbed his arm with my knife? Like, wouldn't he drop the gun? And I could say, yes, that is exactly what happens if you stab him with the knife, right? It's a little bit more intuitive. Or chances are if somebody has a very large weapon like a sledgehammer or a shotgun, and you hit somebody in the head with that, it's bad. Like shockingly, this is really bad. And it's satisfying for the players to do something decisive that they opt into. It's not a random result of I hit them and then I roll a on a random injury location chart. Like, and if I happen to get 10, I hit them in the head, and that's what happened. You say with agency, I am swinging for the head, and there's drawbacks to doing so. It's harder to hit, but there's a benefit there, and the players have so much control in that way. And it's been, from what I've seen, it's very satisfying for the players, and I've found it the few times I've gotten to be a player really entertaining. In one of the internal play tests, I'm playing a outlaw named Gator, and he has a feature that gives him mechanical gator jaws, which is a little appropriate. And it's really great when somebody pulls a gun on one of my posse members. I can say, I bite his hand off. How dare he pull a gun on my friends? And that's just cool. I can do that
Yes.
in the system, and it's dramatic and gnarly and a lot of fun.
Yeah, and designing it from the ground up to have impactful, like meaningful choices. It seems to be as like kind of like the guiding star in a lot of what you're tacking
Yeah.
towards, and that's you're speaking my language. Love to see it.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes a tactical game. So I know the term tactical is a little loaded in that people will have different approaches to what it means. Some people think it needs to have a grid-based play, a little bit more like a war game. Some people think it has to have a lot of numerical complexity, so you weigh these options. But I think what maybe everybody would agree on as like a foundation of tactical is all the players have interesting choices to make, things to weigh, problems to solve that there may be not an obvious solution to, and they'll need to work together to solve it, right? Interesting choices. It's not, I had a character in Adventure League many years ago, an evocation wizard, got to tier 3, I think, like level 11 or 12 in organized, event play. He had 2 wands of lightning bolt, and all he did was take area of effect spells. So there was often very little tactical choices I needed to make. I was an evocation wizard. I could exclude my friends. I don't want to use a spell slot. Well, I'll use one of my 20 wands of lightning bolt charges I have at my disposal to just lightning bolt. What is lightning bolt? Like that one old meme about the guy throwing the beanbag and saying lightning bolt. That's not tactical, right? My character build removed tactical choices, actually. If I don't need to worry about positioning my fireballs, I just throw them out all day. That's less um, Now, granted, I built the character to be a little bit less tactical, but the poor barbarian in the party or the fighter who isn't a battle master gets to just swing their sword, right? Especially in tier 3, where saying that I run and swing on the chandelier and tackle the guy, tier 3 D&D over level 10, things got 200 hit points. You can't be doing that. You need to do
Hmm.
all the damage you can. Otherwise, we are all dead. Anyway, yeah, tactical choices means you have interesting things to decide. Like, is it worth going for the harder shot with a headshot? Maybe we don't have to kill all the zombies if we're able to build a barricade to slow them down, or things like that. Is I think very interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people confuse. They don't see the lack of difference between not having choices and having one like singular best choice. And if I don't care if you have 17 buttons, if like pushing 16 of them is a trap, right, or it's just
Right.
less effective,
Yeah,
then
yeah, exactly.
you don't have choice.
Yeah,
Or you don't have
and
meaningful
tactics has
choice.
to be in the moment. So strategy could be like how you built your character, right?
Mm.
You could build a character that is powerful. That doesn't mean they have tactical choices to make.
Mm.
Um, and I just like when, you know, uh, the way I design fights is usually there's lots of plates spinning. And so you have interesting tactical choices. It's not just like I ran a play test just the other day where it's simple. I wanted the monsters to be zombies, simple enemy. But the players weren't there to kill all the zombies. They were there to save somebody trapped in a house full of zombies. That was their only goal, get the guy out. But the zombies the house was in a town full of zombies. So now they have to think, when do we fire our guns? We probably want to wait because they're loud. Then I added in, there's a bounty hunter also trying to capture the person they're trying to save. Now they have to decide, do they fight him, try to recruit him? They have now decisions to make. How much do they sneak? How much do they go in guns blazing? Just there's tactical choices to be made moment to moment then, especially when somebody decides to start fanning the hammer, blasting somebody, and then they hear all the zombies in the town starting to come. It's like, okay, new decisions need to be made. We now have new problems to solve. That's how I like to build things where there's time limits and using clocks basically, right? The zombies get the guy who's hiding in the wardrobe upstairs. You only have so long to get him. All of that makes for more tactical play.
Yeah, and that's great advice. Even if you're just looking at it from like even if you're not building a game right now, even if you're looking as a game master designing an encounter or adventure scenario, having multiple options that are perhaps equally valid because you haven't decided what the right answer is, right? If they're going to
Right.
sneak in or everything's going to go haywire, then like you have not presented them with a meaningful choice. You presented them with a
Yeah.
trap.
Yeah, it's not
It's
just a trap, right? And I'm a big fan of and Mark, at Arcane Mark, he talks
Hmm.
about this for Pathfinder. It's that there's hazards more than traps. That
Hmm.
there are things that get in the way or that impede that you make tactical decisions around rather than being gotcha'd into, oops, you didn't check this 5 foot square for traps, and now you fall into a pit. A little bit less of that design and more, you're in a shootout with bandits, but there's a river rapids between you. And there's a wagon that got stuck in the middle with the only doctor in your wagon train. You got to save him, but the bandits are also ambushing you. How do you solve this? Now you have a hazard of you could get swept down river, right? But it's usable for both sides. You could punch a bandit and they fall into the river and get swept down as well. So hazards create opportunity, tactical opportunity for players because it's known. And when
Love
hazards
it.
are known, here's a pro tip when designing fights, the more known the hazard is, the more deadly you can make the hazard because the players know it's there. You don't want to have a gotcha trap that kills somebody instantly, but maybe there's a drop into a lava pit way in the corner over there. No one's at risk of accidentally falling in, but maybe you could throw somebody in there if you're clever, right? You're creating opportunities.
And maybe it's a risk, maybe it's a struggle to grapple someone and drag them
Yeah,
over
maybe they
there. And
try to
now
throw
it's
you
like,
in, right?
now
Yeah,
you're a
there's
lot closer to the lava than you were.
exactly. That's fun tactical decisions the players get to make, regardless of what system you're in or what build they have. The core the core encounter has tactics built into it.
Hmm. Perfect. Love it. Everybody, if you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, go listen to more Peter on Tales from Elsewhere. Check out Clockworld and much more to come. Not that, I mean, yeah, Weird West is a vibe. Yeah, I really enjoy just like, yeah, there's a lot of fun, unexplored things that you like, maybe you don't necessarily get to do in a medieval faux fantasy world. So yeah, good stuff. Just remind the folks real quick where they can find you on the internet.
Sure thing. So the main place to find me is at Tales from Elsewhere Games on YouTube. That's where pretty much everything happens, where I post announcements of content of playtests. It has links to the website, to the Discord server, to the Patreon page. All that stuff is out there. The Patreon page just got set up fairly recently, but that's for people who want to help support the artists and creatives that I'm working with to help add art to the game because I believe in working real life artists, right? And commissioning awesome artwork. And you can see some of it there. And if you want to hang out with me and talk more shop, I'm like really active in the Tales from Elsewhere Discord. There's a link on the YouTube page.
Awesome. Thanks so much for spending your time and your insights with us. Everybody home, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care. Have fun.